evening, everybody, and welcome to RAMP, Real Access Motivates Progress, live Wednesday night podcast. We are here every Wednesday night live at 7 o'clock p.m., talking about all things Rhode Island and across the country, about resources and events that you should be attending to aid and benefit the disability and elderly communities. Tonight, we're talking to the Ocean State Trauma-Informed Care Coalition. Yes, that is a mouthful, but what they do is truly amazing. And we're actually talking about the live virtual conference that'll be happening in just a couple of weeks. So I want to introduce my guests tonight, Will and Christine. Thank you guys for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Glad to be here.
We're going to start off tonight by having each of you introduce yourself and what your relationship is to OSTICC. Christine, why don't you go first?
Okay, my name is Christine Hathaway. I'm Senior Director for Behavioral Health at Perspectives Corporation during my day job, and I'm a founding member of OSTICC and part of this coalition from the beginning. As secretary and now treasurer, I understand. We're a small growing group, but Will and I are at the core.
Awesome. Will, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you and your relationship to OSTICC?
Sure. My name is Will Bodwin, and I'm the president of OSTICC. I come to OSTICC as a parent of an individual with autism and other disabilities. And as Christine, I'm one of the founding members of OSTICC.
Before we get into the conference, Will, why don't you tell all those who may not understand what exactly Trauma-Informed Coalition actually does and what it stands for? So if you can give us a little bit of background of what it's all about.
Sure. The Ocean State Trauma-Informed Community Coalition is an idea that we came up with in response to some similar things that have happened around the country. We're kind of modeled after what happened in Tarpon Springs, Florida. About 10 years ago, they decided that some of the problems that were happening within the town, the person who was the vice mayor at the time, a woman named Robin Sanger, got together with a clinician and wondered what's behind some of the difficulties that the town was having. And Robin sort of hatched the idea of coming up with trying to make the town a trauma-informed community so that the town could be more welcoming to all folks, no matter who they are. So that means people with disabilities, it means people with mental illness, it means everybody. And so we thought, wow, that would be kind of cool to do statewide in Rhode Island. So that's kind of how we came up with the idea of trying to start a similar initiative here. So what you're seeing is sort of the beginning of trying to launch that project.
That's amazing. Christine, what do you have to add to that?
Will and I both come out of the developmental disabilities community, and in our community, the restraint and seclusion was a big part of just the culture and the work of what we did with people who had really sometimes very dangerous behaviors. And that was just part of the culture that grew out of the history of institutionalization with people with disabilities. So we worked very hard to eliminate use of those procedures. And through that process of trying to figure out how we handle these really difficult, challenging behaviors people were showing us without putting our hands on them, that's how we came to trauma-informed care. And we participated in a learning series with SAMHSA to really understand the principles behind trauma-informed care. But what Will was saying about what happened in Tarpon Springs, what they really realized is all the money they were putting towards social problems, homelessness, suicide, domestic violence, all those dollars were going out there, but their numbers weren't looking good. They weren't seeing the improvement they wanted to see by putting money towards those initiatives. And that's really something we're seeing across our nation. Money goes to all these siloed entities that are trying to work on the back end of a problem without addressing the cause of that problem. And the cause is rooted in trauma that people experience and the lasting effects it has on them and in their lives. And it includes health effects, diabetes, heart disease, all those things are related to trauma. They're finding out that through research, and as well as mental health issues.
So what can people, by joining this conference, this virtual conference that they're having, I believe it's November 19th. Am I correct with that? I just want to make sure I said the right date. Okay, perfect. On November 19th, what can people expect by being part of this conference, and who should actually register to be part of this conference?
So this conference, our audience, we really geared the conference towards a very wide audience, because understanding what trauma is and some techniques and approaches and things you can change in your own life to improve situations is really affects everyone in a number of different ways. I'm going to let Will talk about the speakers, who are just absolutely wonderful. But I think anyone, families, people who have people in their lives who struggle in one way or another, whether it's because of disability or mental health issues, people who are working with the public and don't understand why sometimes they get the reactions that they get from customers who come up to their counter. Anyone would be appropriate to attend this conference. Will, do you want to talk a little bit about the speakers?
Sure. Let me just add to what Christine said. I think in the past 18 months or so, there's no one who hasn't been traumatized by what we've just gone through and are still going through with COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Absolutely.
one of the core principles in trauma-informed care is building relationships. And so that's one thing that this group seeks to do. We're trying to attract people from all walks of life so that people who are in different parts of society can develop relationships with others. So, for instance, people with disabilities, there can be problems sometimes with developing relationships with law enforcement and with first responders. And there's just as good of a possibility that they could have some sort of an interaction at some point because of an emergency. Wouldn't it be great if they knew each other, right? So it would be good for people with disabilities to learn to have relationships with first responders, and it would also be really educational for people who are first responders to know something about that segment of the population that has needs that are a little bit different sometimes than other folks.
Yeah.
So,
I agree with you. What you guys have done is brought together a whole bunch of organizations and leaders in our community. And we have monthly meetings where we all get together. I run a foundation called RAMP that's all about disability and inclusion, but there's police officers, there's elder care, there's all different kinds of therapists and organizations that have all come together to learn from each other, learn the core problems in each of our communities or our sectors, and we're all working together to solve the problems from the start instead of after the fact. And I love the fact that we're doing all of this. Christine, you had something to add.
Yeah, it's about culture change. I mean, that's really what OSTICC is trying to do, is to help the community understand trauma, become more aware of it and more sensitive to it. So when they see the results of trauma in the behavior of people that they might be working with or just running into in the public, that they can understand that and alter how they respond to that so they don't re-traumatize and create an even worse situation. It's about understanding people's need for help when it really is difficult to understand that given what you might be seeing in their behavior.
Yeah, the culture right now
Right.
in the world today is all about diversity, equity, inclusion, and you can't talk about any of that without adding disability. You know what I mean? And different people. We're stronger together, and the only way we're going to solve this is all meeting at the
Mhm.
table and all saying our part and finding a common ground for us all
Yeah.
to make a huge difference. I just want to let everybody out there know that in the comments under this podcast, there is a link. It says click here to register. That is a link to register for the conference that we are talking about tonight. And if anybody has any questions, you can put the question in the chat boxes, and we will try to get to as many as we can while we're here on the air tonight. Will, would you like to talk about some of the speakers that are going to be at the conference?
Sure. The first speaker in the morning is a person named Raul Almazar, and that's a person who is a registered nurse who has done lots and lots of trainings on trauma-informed care. He also contracts with SAMHSA, and he was actually involved in a virtual learning network that Christine and I and other folks participated in that lasted over a year, where we learned a lot of what we have discovered about trauma-informed practice. So he's a superstar presenter, has a depth of knowledge in trauma-informed care that's second to none. And so we're really excited to have him in the morning. In the afternoon, we have a person who has written a book. Her name is Emma Vanderclift. She's written a book called Talk to Me. And Emma's a really interesting story. She's a person who's neurodivergent. She is autistic. And she is married to a person, Norman Kuntz, who is one of the foremost people in the disability community in terms of presenters. They are a couple. And the second half of the day will be partially an interview of Norman interviewing Emma about this book, Talk to Me. And the book is really fascinating. The premise of the book is that in order to learn about de-escalation, Emma interviewed many, many hostage negotiators. And so talk about a high stakes de-escalation scenario. She interviewed hostage negotiators that were involved in some of the biggest situations around the world. And she took what she learned from that and tried to make it so that that knowledge of what they did is accessible to people who are teachers, who might have some, or people in the disability community who have difficulty, behavior issues, so to speak, or people in the mental health field where someone gets into a crisis and before you know it, things can go in a bad way if someone is not a skillful de-escalator. So what can we learn from her conversations with people who have done this in the most volatile of all situations? So I heard her speak before, and I was really fascinated by the topic and her approach to it and what she learned. And so she's going to be sharing that with us in that conference
Mhm.
in a way that's going to be accessible and people can sort of take from it what they will based on what their needs are. So first responders will get something from it. People who are teachers will get something from it, social workers, and even
Parents.
parents
Parents.
and other community members, a lot of times, some things are just misunderstandings. But the crux of what she discovered, I think, was that it's important for people who come up upon a crisis to try to get to develop a relationship with the person who's in crisis. And by doing that, now you have a shot of trying to de-escalate. If you don't try to do that and you just go with power, some power differential, now you're not as likely to have a good outcome. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a fascinating topic. I'm really excited to have her and Norman with us.
I believe her interest in this came from her youth in school as an autistic person, and how difficult it was for her, given the school's approach to dealing with behaviors that were unexpected or problematic for them based on the systems they had in place. So I believe that's where her interest really arose from. But her techniques that she has generated from her interviews around building relationship and communication are just so applicable to every aspect of interpersonal relationships.
It's just so fascinating. And what people don't understand is how much they can really take from this and how much it actually reflects their lives, from bullying to, like I said, disability or mental health. I mean, there is not somebody in this planet that has not had their mental health tested during COVID, because the isolation or, the masking or some part of it, to an extent, everybody is an individual. So there's so many different various ways, but everybody has been affected in some way. And how you deal with that and how to recognize it in yourself. I'll tell you, I've been talking to a lot of people and they didn't realize how much they were traumatized by COVID, by talking about it and talking about other people's experiences and saying, hey, yeah, that really is a trauma. That isn't, just me, having a problem. That's something I haven't experienced before. And that's what the difference is. What are some of the other things, Christine, that people can expect from the conference?
I think, can I just add to what you were saying? This topic is just so rich, right? So just in the first year of COVID, and COVID is when we talk about it being a trauma, one of the aspects of it is that people were truly in fear of their lives for very good reason. And that is one of those elements that makes an event traumatic, that sense of fear for your well-being and safety. But in that first year, ending in October 2020, deaths due to opioids were 27,000 in this country. 97,000 deaths related to alcohol. And those were the highest numbers the CDC has reported for deaths in those categories ever. And suicides are up 30%. And just the trickle down of the impact of those deaths and related mental health concerns are just enormous. It affects us all. But prior to COVID, there was plenty of trauma to go around. There was a lot. Trauma is a big word, and it's sometimes it's unfortunate that that's the terminology that we use, because some people say, well, with trauma, I haven't been in a war zone, I haven't been in the middle of a natural disaster, I don't have trauma in my life. But once you understand what we're talking about when it comes to trauma, you'll come to understand that we all have experienced some level of trauma in our lives. So in terms of what to expect from the day, I think I'm very excited about it. And I go to conferences and trainings all the time. And I often think, oh, it's going to be a long day. But this one is very exciting for me. I've heard Raul speak in the past, and he's just a wonderful, engaging speaker. But Emma, I'm really so excited to hear about her work. And I've read her book. It's wonderful. So I think there'll be some breakout sessions. There's going to be differences in format. So it won't just be a talking head in the room, but it'll be much more engaging. And, you know, for those people who are out there who are social workers or mental health professionals, we're offering 6 CEUs for the day at a very low cost. So I hope that people, you know, that makes a little incentive for them to come and join us on the 19th.
Yeah. What are some of the breakout sessions that you guys have involved so people kind of know what to expect there?
Well, can you take that?
You know, I'm not sure if we landed on, you know, we're still working with Emma and Norman, who are, the afternoon will be where the breakout sessions are going to be happening. And we haven't really landed on topics for the breakout sessions yet. So we're still fleshing it out.
Yeah, you got a couple of weeks to do that still. You got 17 days, just to say, you got like 17 days. So let's get moving. But I'm actually excited about it because, you know, like you were saying, Christine, that people are saying, you know, that they're not in a war zone, but trauma, even for the ones that didn't believe that COVID was real, or that were saying that we don't need to mask or we don't need to do this, that's a trauma in itself, because now you're putting yourself on the other side dealing with people who are actually dealing with it. So either way you look at it, we all have had it and it's touched all of us. I know I contracted COVID in January and I still have many symptoms. I'm what they call a COVID long hauler and still have many symptoms from it from January. And I don't even know how I caught it. I was literally home alone for a month, and we think I caught it from a package that was delivered to my house. Is the only thing that we can contract it back to. So it has affected so many different lives. But tell us a little bit more, like, give us the incentive, give us your pitch, Christine, of why people should register, because there is a cost to this. Where does that money go and what does it benefit?
So that money, actually, the cost is very low. So for someone who's just participating and doesn't need CEUs, it's only $25. So it's a very low cost for the full day conference. For people who need CEUs, it's $95, which is also extremely low compared to the rates of conferences that are out there for CEUs. So we priced it low for a reason. We priced it low because this information is so important and can make such a difference for folks to start to understand. Like Will and I have been doing this since 2013, and I don't consider myself an expert by any means, because there's always so much more to learn. But it's so important for people to understand and even to connect and make that realization that things that have happened to them have impacted them in a way that actually physically changes their brain. There's, you know, we started back in the 70s, you know, when you started to hear about post-traumatic responses as it was related to war vets coming back. But the science of neurology has just blossomed since then. And with imaging and other ways of seeing what's happening within the brain, the research clearly shows that traumas, little traumas that happen every day and build up, as well as big traumas, changes your brain, and it changes the way you think and the way you respond to things. So just that basic knowledge to understand that and connect with that and become more aware of that will change how you deal with your everyday issues and the issues of those around you as well. I think it's so important. And then Emma's talk about building relationship and conversation. You had mentioned earlier, Tina, how these years have been so much about inclusion and equality, and there is a strong movement out there. But there is also a strong movement that is very rigid about, that kind of me psychology, right? It's about me and what I can get and how it impacts me. But we live in a community, and we thrive as a community. And we really need to really work hard at our message around equality, inclusion, and understanding what makes us similar, what makes us the same, and ways we can interact to make the world a better place for all of us. So in part, people should
Yeah.
come because it promotes what the world we want to see, a world of welcoming inclusion and equality.
I agree
The
with you
other,
because,
just to,
like 1 second, Will, I have noticed through COVID that everybody got a small glimpse of what the disability community deals with, especially the immobile disability community. When you couldn't go out to your favorite restaurant, you couldn't go to your family's houses, or you couldn't interact or transportation or anything because of everything about COVID. That's what we deal with, whether there's a pandemic or not. You didn't like it. You didn't like the isolation. You didn't like staying at home. And just as much as I think Zoom helped everybody because we have a new way of connecting with people, that shouldn't be the norm going forward. You know what I mean? Just because it's easy for accessibility doesn't mean we want to still stay home, because that means that
Right.
we're still trapped. That still means we're still isolated 23 hours of the day if we have an hour meeting that day. That shouldn't be the norm. Yes, it should be a backup, but it shouldn't be the norm. Everybody should know that we need to make things accessible. We need to make things inclusive. We need to have that face-to-face interaction with people to get ourselves out there. I'm sorry to cut you off, Will. I just wanted to make that point.
no problem. That was a great point. I mean, there's no way that a person without a disability can really know what it's like to be in the shoes of a person who has the disability. If you're in a wheelchair, there's no way a person that's not in a wheelchair really fully understands what that the implications of that every single day, every single part of your life. What I wanted to add on to the conversation is that when you talk about what do you get for your money when you sign up for the conference, in addition to the training that you get, this is sort of a fundraiser for the OSTICC group at the same time. And if we are able to generate a profit, after expenses, those funds will be turned into some future actions of OSTICC. We're hoping to have events in the future that will benefit the public as well. So it's sort of an investment into OSTICC. We're hoping that the conference will generate some after action steps, like what did we learn from Emma that we can take into the future? And maybe we can use some resources that come from the conference to try to bring something to fruition, some idea that comes out of a conference, what people learn at the conference. And we're hoping to get people also engaged in becoming part of work groups that can help to do stuff after the conference. So I think there's a lot of potential for the future tied up in what you're getting for your buck, so to speak.
I agree with you. And I think every elected official, every organization, every nursing therapy program out there, every police department, fire department that has anybody that has interaction with the public should be part of this. And to take the step further, join OSTICC, join our group, join our monthly meetings, join and give us what you see in your field, so that way we can make sure that we're attending to that field too. Because I'll tell you, these meetings once a month, we learn so much from each other, because Will and Christine come from the developmental side. I have the physical side that I deal with, but we also have police officers who deal with the law enforcement side and the therapists who deal with that side. So having everybody bring something to the table, everybody brings something that we can learn from. So the biggest thing that we really want to get out of this is bringing more and more organizations together, because the biggest thing that I say all the time is there is not an organization or a business that is going to open up that is not going to encounter the disability community. You're not. With it being the largest minority in this country and the only minority that does not discriminate, and anybody at any time can join this community, you're going to encounter it. So learn how to do it now, so you always have a positive outcome, instead of waiting for a tragedy to happen to have a negative outcome to try to turn it around later. Let's get in front of it instead of being reactive behind it. Christine, what do you want to add to that?
I just want to add to that too, that this is just the beginning. I mean, it's about getting information out there and facilitating people's understanding, but there is a fiscal cost to the social problems we have. And we keep throwing money at those problems, but it doesn't stop them. They just demand more and more funding year after year. And again, I get back to the science. The research clearly shows that homelessness, substance abuse, all those domestic violence, all those things have their roots in trauma. And if we take some of that funding and work towards getting some of that funding to deal with the cause of the problem, then it changes the whole fiscal structure. And what we're doing now just isn't sustainable. We need to work together. Right. We can't keep working in silos. It just hasn't been effective. It needs to change. And so
we're being too reactive. Yeah. Like one of our viewers, Heidi's just said, too many people are falling through the cracks. And if we all work together, we can stop that. We need to stop being reactive, and we need to start catching up and doing it from the front end going forward, and doing it right from the get-go. I mean, you're always going to have that one incident that you weren't prepared for, because, I mean, if it's never happened, you're not going to be prepared for it. But, with homelessness rising, the cold weather coming, it's just going to make things worse, and we need to get on the other side. Will, what do you have to add to that?
I think that you said it well. I think that we can only move forward if we have people locking arms and working together. And that's what this organization is about, is trying to develop relationships. I'm also really interested in attracting people from the general public who are maybe not necessarily attached to any organization, but just have a desire to help make things better. One thing that inspires me about the Tarpon Springs model is that they respect the ideas of anybody who has an idea that has some merit, whether they're involved with an organization or not. Those ideas are given a listen, and then the organization looks to see if there's merit in the idea. And so somebody who is just a person off the street could have an impact on the entire community. The OSTICC could be a resource that people could tap into to try to help make change.
I completely agree with you.
Part of what Will, I think, is getting to is that, the effects of trauma are like, you have a fulcrum where, like a seesaw, and when you start adding all those negative experiences and things that happen to people to one end of that seesaw, and you get extreme effects of trauma. But people are resilient and can learn to be resilient. And part of being resilient is having positive experiences. So part of what Tarpon Springs did and what we would like to do here in Rhode Island is in a planful way, create events in our community with like-minded people who share a certain set of values in terms of respect and communication and understanding, to create events that are just pleasant, happy, family-oriented events that people can walk away from and feel a little better and heal a little bit their heart.
I agree. I think one of the biggest things that we can do to start turning things around is, as hard as it is, and I am not saying it's an easy thing to do, but we need to let go of the past. We don't need to forget it. We need to let go of it. Sit down, listen twice as much as we talk, and learn from other people's experiences. See things through other people's eyes that they're dealing with right now at this date and time. Not what happened 100 years ago, or not what happened that came up in the past, or not what happened to me 6 weeks ago. Today is a new day. Today we all sit around the table and we change our perspective from everybody who's sitting around that table. And what we really need to do is start with a fresh slate and find ways to make whatever happened in the past that was negative to never happen again, and to move forward in a positive together fashion. If we could manage to do that and slowly start by small groups and bringing more and more people with us, we're going to move ahead in a positive effect and let the past go. Like I said, I'm not saying forget it. I'm saying put it aside and let's try to think fresh, because not everybody thinks the same way. Not everybody was part of that past or part of your past. I mean, look at me. I walked into a 10-minute surgery and became part of the disability community. That could happen to anybody. Never expected it, never wanted it, just, but what I can do, cry about it or make an impact about it and find ways that people with disability do not have to feel left out and move forward. That's just an example.
That's a wonderful point about why you should get involved, because it's a way to take that pain from the past and turn it to something good that helps other people. In a trauma-informed approach, I don't need to know what your specific trauma was. There doesn't have to be a rehashing. Sometimes when people will ask about having trainings and we have discussions, people in the group might be a little standoffish because they were afraid that they're going to have to talk about what happened to them. But we don't need to know what happened specifically to people. We just need to understand that everybody carries that pain. And sometimes because of that, they act in ways that are unexpected or maybe a little scary or frightening, and if we can understand that, we change the way we respond, and it makes everything better, and it's healing for the community.
And the one thing that people need to realize is it's not a competition. My pain and my disability, if you got a paper cut today, Will, and that was the thing that set you off over the edge, I'm sure a lot of things else led up to that. That makes your paper cut no worse or no trivia to my being paralyzed from the waist down. Your trauma is your trauma. What set you off or what set you in that direction is all within you. There is no competition. Nobody is worse off than the other. No one deserves more higher praise than the other, or warrior. Oh, she's better because she went through. That has nothing to do with it. It's not a competition of who's more worse off. Will, I'm sure with the son on the spectrum, you have something to say about that.
Yeah, so I think that, in my son's case, my son has autism, but he also has a severe anxiety disorder. And so it causes him sometimes to become self-abusive if things are not going his way. He cannot speak. And so think about the trauma that causes him every day. He cannot tell people what his wishes are. He can't tell anybody if he likes the person that's working with him. And so he's a very vulnerable guy, and he's actually a person who was, he's the one who sort of inspired me to do this work, if you want to call it inspired, because I felt when he was growing up, like I couldn't help him. I felt like I couldn't help him. And so I went about trying to learn, what can I do to help him? Because the situation was that if someone became aggressive and he was a person like my son Andre, he would be restrained. He would end up in a prone restraint, which is really, really dangerous.
And more
And
traumatic.
and more traumatic, and just like made him even more anxious than he was before. And so he was walking around in this heightened state of anxiety all the time. And so I went to a conference in Washington in 2006, and that's where I was introduced to the trauma-informed model by Joan Galeese, who is a person who ran the virtual training network that we all attended. And when I heard about this model, it seemed like it was a way out for him, at least a way to get him out of the constant restraint paradigm that he was in. Because if you are going to say, all right, you can't restrain my son anymore, the question then becomes, okay, if he becomes aggressive, what do you do now?
Right.
Right? And so it was, this particular model says that, well, you really don't want to do anything else. Instead, what you want to do is you want to make his life less traumatic in the first place, so that he doesn't end up in a situation where he's going to become agitated. You try to make his environment more welcoming. You try to make people around him more understanding of what his life is about. And that made a lot of sense to me. And we have been successful around the state since we were able to sort of advocate for getting rid of prone restraint. We've been pretty successful in getting people who work in the disability community with individuals like my son to de-escalate in a different way. That's why the Emma conversation is really exciting to me, because she is talking about really high stakes de-escalation. Like when my son is self-abusive, it's not pretty sight. He smashes his head against the wall to the point where sometimes he has black eyes and whatnot. And so how do you stop that from happening? Well, you create an environment that's friendlier, that is more understanding. You create relationships between my son and the people around him that are more conducive to a more normal life.
And I'm sure once you de-escalate and you do those processes, it's not only helping your son by not having to be restrained and putting him in a better environment, it's also helping you and your family not having to watch that, or not having to be scared that that's going to happen to him again. So it's not only helping him, it's helping everybody around him, including the families. So it's such an important piece. Christine?
So when we started as a group, prior to coining the OSTICC name, we were working in the disability community, and there were many of us. Like, I work for a very large agency that has group homes, and at one time our restraints were well over 1,000 a year, and we've eliminated restraint. But to get there, it was a long process of learning. And once, having been through that, as those of us who are original to OSTICC, having been through that, we really saw the value of taking that beyond the disability, the intellectual and developmental disability community, because everyone needs to understand that there is another way, that power and control isn't the way to solve problems in a society. And there are a lot of systems that have been set up that are based on that. So constantly, people who need help are just re-traumatized, which creates additional societal problems. One of the things
Right.
that we are slowly talking about is trauma-informed policing. And that's, the police in our state and others have had such a difficult time in the last few years, but coming to an understanding about trauma, why people behave the way they do, and what you can do differently. It's scary. It takes a long time to work your way through. Like Will can tell you, restraint didn't just stop overnight. It was a
Yeah.
long process of learning and turning people's minds. So the more people in our community that we can get involved in understanding what trauma is, what it means to be sensitive to people's trauma, and move forward from there, the better our community will be.
Yeah. And that's
And
basically what
Tina,
we're
to your
telling all of you. The link is in the chat. So make sure you're clicking on the link to register for this amazing conference that is going to benefit everybody. This is important, and this is something that everybody needs to know. Now that we're nearing the end of the hour and we're running out of time a little bit, I want you each to give a 1 minute of why people should register for this. Give that last plea of why people should register this. Will, you can go first.
Sure. I think that if we want to create a welcoming community for people, it's important for us to get involved with an organization whose mission is to do that. And when I look around and I see a lot of the problems that exist, and COVID being just the most recent, I see a need for people to connect, and that's what we're trying to do. So the point of this conference is to get people to hear about trauma, to maybe come up with some new tools in their toolkit, but also to support the mission of OSTICC moving forward, so that we can do more work, and maybe we might be able to take on a project that someone who's listening to us today might think up.
Yeah, great point. Christine?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important for people to come because for the vast majority of people, this is new information. It's information they haven't heard before, but it's information that leads to understanding of themselves and the people that they love around them and the people that they work with. It's new, relatively new science that's just starting to get out there into the larger community. And it's important to understand because one of the things we didn't talk about was secondary trauma, and that is the impact of other people suffering on those who care for them. So whether it is your elderly parent with Alzheimer's, or working in the emergency room during these times of COVID, how awful this has been for so many people, or even just caring for a child at home who has a disability. There's so many situations to understand how that impacts you, so that you're not, I mean, we always judge ourselves, right? I shouldn't feel like that. That it's not that bad. I shouldn't be concerned about that. But you know what? Sometimes the reality is that you need to understand, yeah, it is affecting me. And I do see how it changes who I am as a person. So I think it's just really important for people personally and professionally as we move forward into this new world where COVID has done a kind of a good thing, I think, Tina, for your community, because you've had this access that you haven't had because you
Right.
can connect with people through Zoom. And even with everything that's going on with George Foreman and other things in our society, it's opened doors for people, and we just need to keep working towards understanding and listening and reaching out to make this world the world we want to see it be.
I agree with you. So the date is November 19th. You need to register. The link is in the byline. If you cannot find the link, you can reach out to me. But the important thing that OSTICC is all about is we don't care who gets the credit. We care that the perspectives change and people open up and people come together. We are one group who make a difference in this world, and we want you all to be part of it. So that is the most important thing. If you have some extra time and you want to be part of the change, join the OSTICC group, come to the event, learn more about the event, or find them on Facebook. It's OSTICC, OSTICC, the Ocean State Trauma Informed Care Community or Coalition on Facebook.
Community
Again,
Coalition.
Community Coalition. If you can't find them, you can always reach out to me and I can make sure, because I am part of the coalition, so I can always put you in touch with everybody. And as always, as we're talking about trauma, go on to www.rampisinclusion.com and grab your red bag, because your red bag is non-tech based. The importance to that is no matter there's a national disaster, you lose power, or anything else, all of your medical information is on you at all times, and that is what's going to help the emergency EMTs and the doctors that are going to help you know exactly what's wrong with you, because all of that information stays private in your little red bag that you have on you at all times. And we will try to get this link available during the conference. So if anybody wants to grab one of those during the conference, we will make sure that that gets up there. I want to thank you both for joining me tonight. I'm hoping that this conference is very successful. Successful or not, we're going to keep up our mission and we're going to keep trudging forward. But join the initiative, join the movement. And if you really want to change the world, these are the amazing individuals that you want to work with. Thank you so much, Will and Christine. And as I always say to everybody, don't just sit there, make a difference. Step up, put yourself out of your comfort zone and change your perspective. Thank you all. See you here next Wednesday night at 7:00 p.m. live on RAMP, Real Access Motivates Progress, as well as the Coalition Talk Radio. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, team.